and it should be okay now.
Yeah.
Great. So can you tell me a bit more about the context in which you're applying mob programming and so on, so we can understand it? Yeah.
Yeah. So our context is fairly unique in that there's kind of an origin story to it all, but it's a group of people who like to pair and mob, and so the hiring process is kind of orchestrated to look for people who also like to pair and mob. And so yeah, so when we have openings, we will send out a bunch of information about mob programming, extreme programming, and similar practices. And then when we conduct the interview, the first question or so is done kind of solo or with a pair, and then but then the rest of it is a mobbing style interview where the person being interviewed gets to navigate through various set of problems, and then it's an open kind of leans coffee style discussion. So the interesting thing about the context is it's a lot of people come here who want to mob, and so generally you'll find people wanting to mob when teams discover things to work on. And yeah, that's a little bit about it, at least.
Okay, that sounds great. And how complex is the project you're working on?
Oh yeah, they vary in complexity. I mean, I think they're all pretty complicated. So there's a lot of IoT cloud going on with the various, whether it's irrigation, whether it's lighting. There's also mobile development, there's front end, back end, there's web, there's a little bit of desktop.
Okay.
Yeah, so the complexity is fairly high. There's some teams that work on maybe simpler websites and applications, but they deal with a whole host of them that they support. So you deal with complexity in a different way there.
Okay, and that's interesting. So do you have like the traditional, for example, mobile versus front-end developer versus back-end developer? And if you do they mob together, or they mob in silos? How is that going?
Yeah. I mean, we've had people who specialize in various different things. So currently, we have people who, their passion is like data. We have some people like that. We have some people who their passion is kind of operations and pipelines and cloud, right? And then we probably have people who probably consider themselves generalists, so that they're not any specific area. But basically, whatever you have everyone mobbing together. And so there's exceptions to that, but generally that's how it goes. And so you'll have, let's say, a data person, a front end person, a cloud person, all mobbing together, let's say for a few days, and then they're going to come across some very UI UX centric type work. Then they invite someone to come to their mob who specializes in that, and then they would finish up that work together. Yeah, so that typically the idea is get the whole system in the room, whether that's technology or domain knowledge or what have you, and basically get it done because everyone's there who needs to be there.
Okay, and how do you handle like context switching? For example, if I'm a front-end engineer and someone invites me to a mob that needs my expertise, but I have some other things to do right now, how do I handle that, and what's expected of me from me?
Yeah. So going back to that scenario, we wanted someone who specializes in UI UX to join us for a bit. We usually send out what we like to call the bat signal, which is where you send them a chat message with, like, the Batman symbol or something, saying like, hey, we need your superhero, we need your help. Please come by when you get a chance. And then we might send a short message like, here's the context. We're working on this product experiment or this feature, and we'd like your help to clean it up or to find the best usability. And so when that person is available and they join, which is usually pretty quick, then it depends person to person. Some people will actually enter the mob and say, give me no context, I'll acclimate as we go. Just keep going. You know what I mean? Just keep rotating, driver, navigator, and when it's my turn, I'll figure it out. Or if you guys ask a question, I'll figure it out. Some people are more in the middle, and some people like a lot of context drawn up. And so depending who the person is, I or someone else will kind of wind up that context. Here's the big picture. Here's what we're working on, just for a couple minutes. Here's what we got now. Let's say we have something built and it's just really crude and engineering looking like. We're like, we want to make this much nicer to use, right? And if more context is needed, then we'll pull out the diagrams we've been drawing or the whiteboarding and share that. And then they're usually ready to go and jump on in and start driving and navigating.
Okay, that's cool. And what about people who, for example, if you want to implement something in the mobile app and you're the navigator, but you don't have any mobile experience, or you're specializing in backend work, for example, how do you do that?
I think I've come across that experience once or twice, maybe not that exact scenario, but where I'm navigating. It's my turn to navigate, but I don't know exactly what to navigate, especially at a low level. And so there's always a couple things you can do. One is just be transparent and say, I don't know exactly what to do here. Can you all help? Or do you have any suggestions? Or can someone else navigate for a while and I'll observe and pick up as we go? Or you can say, I think I understand the domain problem. And this is what I've done before as well, is say, I think if what we need to do is show a text box on the field and then validate it, right? I don't know the front end technology, the mobile development technology to do so. So I'd say, I think that's what we need to do. And then I ask someone in the mob, what's the next step to bring that about? And they'd be like, okay, well, what you want to do is instantiate this user control or whatever they navigate next. And then they navigate for a bit, and then I kind of watch it, and then I can start to pick it up as I see the patterns in that particular framework or language.
Okay, that sounds quite reasonable. And do you only mob for implementing functionality, or you also do it for defining new requirements, or maybe more business-oriented aspects, or whatever it is? So what's the mob purpose usually?
Yeah, another word for mobbing is ensemble, and Willem Larsen started this thought or hashtag like ensemble first. And so typically that's how we go with things, is we'll try it out ensembling it first, whether it's email, whether it's figuring out what to do next, whether it's interacting with a customer or a product person to get guidance on figuring out what's the next most important thing to work on. And so, yeah, we typically seek to figure that out together. And the great thing is there's no need for resync later. Like, oh, Austin went out and figured out what we need to do. Now he has to go tell everybody. It's like, well, we figured it out together. And so then we just start working on it. And then the benefit is too, we all teach each other different things. So there's usually an art to conversations with customers or product people to figure out what's the next most important thing and then how to thin slice it. And so a lot of those skills get taught as we do it together as an ensemble or a mob. And so that it typically is all the things, but there are exceptions to that, of course.
Okay, so to make sure I've understood you, if there's a new feature requirement, for example, you've seen some feedback from users and find a pattern, it's a common practice for the product manager, if you have such position, to get together with some devs, some probably QAs, some other people from the organization, and assemble on defining this user requirement so it can go towards being implemented.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, so that since a mob is already together,
Mhm.
that we just invite in that customer, that product person, and they can stay with the mob as long as they like, or they can leave as soon as the conversation's done.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's a scheduled interaction, and sometimes that's an ad hoc interaction. So scheduled interaction might be like a morning stand-up with a product or customer type person. An
Mhm.
ad hoc interaction might be we had an initial idea about what to do, and then we ran an experiment, and we want to get validation. So we'll invite them back into the mob, show them what we have, and they'll be like, yeah, that's on the right track. Or no, I think you need to course correct here. Or
Mhm.
they're, so basically it's just always that principle of whoever is needed is there, or whoever is needed, you invite to be there.
Mhm. Okay, okay. And
Yeah.
how do you keep, is it always possible to keep the feedback loop tight between for example, if you invite a customer, maybe they won't be available right away,
Mhm.
which um, defeats the purpose of the mop a bit. And
Sure.
how do you handle that? Are there any instances here with this?
Yeah. I mean, what we strive for and seek towards is to, for example, for internal people that we get feedback from, we try to create a culture where they know that being available for us is going to improve their flow efficiency much higher, as opposed
Mhm.
to being not available, right?
Mhm.
And so we try to promote that, I guess, for internal and external
Mhm.
interactions. But that doesn't always happen, and there's waiting and queuing.
Mhm.
And if you can't persuade the waiting and queuing to go away, then you deal with it, right? And so I think the ways we've dealt with it before. So, for example,
Yeah.
right now, my current mob is interacting with um, a data science team in a completely different department.
Mhm.
And so their availability doesn't always line up with ours. But what we do is we do everything we can to keep the flow efficiency going. So,
Mhm.
for example, if we need read writes to properly analyze something and they're not available, we might message them and they might give us the read writes real quick, and we can continue our research and experimentation.
Mhm.
Uh, and then we'll just build up a small batch of questions, but usually they're available by the next day or so, or later in the afternoon,
Mhm.
to mob with us and figure out whatever is needed to be figured out next.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Uh, Great. So, okay. And the next topic is from what you said previously, the organization, the engineering organization was started with the presumption that you're going to do mob programming, or it was introduced a bit later in the organization.
Yeah. So the origin story is fairly interesting. It's about 10 years ago for our organization. And basically, someone came in. You'll if you know him in the industry, Woody Zool, and
Mhm.
he basically um, shared with the team, like, Kanban, extreme programming, and some dedicated learning time. And during the dedicated learning time, they're doing this thing called randoris, where they were taking turns at the keyboard doing things like test-driven development exercises.
Mhm.
And that was only in the morning. Um, and then someone ran into an issue, and they needed a lot of help. And so they called a
Mhm.
meeting. And as people were in the meeting together, they just started working on the problem and rotating at the keyboard,
Okay.
uh, like they were doing in their kind of dedicated learning time. And then they basically started solving the problems together. And then the meeting came to an end, and they're like, well, this is working so well. We're solving so many problems so quickly, and we're all learning and having a good time. Let's keep it going. So they moved from meeting room to meeting room and just kept working together. And then they retrospected at the end of the day, and they said, would we all like to keep working this way? Yes. So they did that for several days in a row until a group of people worked together all the time, called themselves a mob eventually. And so
Uh-huh.
when that group worked together for a while, I wasn't on this team because it was before my time at this organization, but
Yeah.
um, they said that they didn't have a bug report for the apps they're working on for a year and a half. Had high flow efficiency, high delivery. I think what would have normally been delivered in a year and a half for like a few feature sets or websites were delivered much faster than that. And then they started automating things so they could deliver more and more different needs. And so then that was audited. And the auditor basically said, whatever this team is doing, you should grow that. And so then when it came time to hire and increase capacity, a lot of these norms and ideas started to flourish of like, hey, let's hire people who want to work this way. So that's where the interview process and that kind of thing. So it was born in an environment that was not doing it at all. It wasn't like 10 years ago, they were mobbing all the time because someone set it up that way. It was a group of people who discovered that they wanted to work this way. And then when it grew and it came time to grow, to have more people, that they just invited and hired for people who wanted to work that way.
Okay, and do you know how much time it took until the benefit of mobbing was like objectively measured, objectively seen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Objective measurement's a really tricky thing with software development, and if needed, I can send you an article by Martin Fowler on how difficult
that'd be great.
Measure such a thing. Yeah. Let me write that down real quick. Martin Fowler measure article. Yeah, so I think most of the times for me personally, whenever anything is come into question, it usually fades away pretty quickly. So when a team is delivering something of value daily to a customer, internal or external, getting feedback on that and delivering the next day, the sense of progress is so high that there's usually very little questioning from a qualitative sense, you know. And so anytime I've come into teams that's had issues and then we start working in this way, there's usually the need for measurements or estimates or any of these ways to, so to speak, prove it, if you can prove such a thing, tend to fade away because everyone involved is very satisfied. And so that's not always the case, but that's typically what I've seen in teams that I'm in. And yeah, and so there have been some measured case studies. It's hard to be, say, like an official academic study. It's still really kind of new when you think about things. And so I can also give you a link to Dan Puckett. He had several Scrum teams. And the way he actually did it with mini teams, where he would come in and say, hey, here's this thing mobbing. If y'all like to try it, I can facilitate it for y'all. We'll measure before and after, and then we'll try to compare apples and oranges with cycle time and velocity and things like that. And so he has some numbers to share on that. But there's not a whole lot else of demonstrable progress or difference. So I'm trying to I don't know what the original audit did, the one I referred to earlier, how they determined that it was going so well. But I think the DORA metrics, if I were to suggest something, if someone said we must measure, you know, I think the DORA metrics are pretty good with, you know, cycle time, release frequency, you know, defect or bug rates. I know I'm forgetting a couple, but those tend to be pretty good ones if you want a learning, experimenting, innovative delivery culture.
Okay, and to ask the question a bit differently, do you know whether before mobbing started, the delivery, the value delivery was less satisfying for developers?
Yeah. So for example, for that original mob programming team, I can send you the video link where they talk about it themselves, so you can hear it from them.
Oh,
yeah, I can send you that one as well. But basically what I remember them describing was, it'd take a year and a half to deliver something that someone could test, right? It would, they had a lot of bugs they were dealing with afterwards. And they had lots of overhead, so lots of large documentation and things like that. And a lot of those problems faded away for the original team. And that's been the same in my experience as well. So I reflect back on my experience before mob programming. I remember being on a team where we would deliver, and then be swimming in 300 bugs, and then would have a bunch of hardening sprints, right? And then we try to catch up from those, don't have enough time to catch them all up, and then we start delivering again, and then maybe brought it down to 200, now we're back up to 250, and so those kind of problems were pretty prevalent. It was harder to share and learn good practices that help with those things. So whether that's delivering in smaller batches, whether that's test-driven development, whether that's just the peer review feedback that comes immediately when you're pairing and mobbing. You don't have to wait for the expert on the team to see it because he's there. Let's say, like you were saying before with the front end, instead of me giving it my shot solo, and then a day later or so he reviews it and then gives me feedback. A lot of problems will persist because what I've seen with code review is you have the interplay going back and forth, and then it comes to the end of the sprint before I was mobbing. And it's just like, well, we need to ship. And even though that person probably had 5 other things to fix in my code, it's just like, well, we need to deliver. So let's move on. So, but when they're pairing or mobbing, those issues usually all get ironed out right then and there. And so when I switched from that to a mob programming environment, the first day I was in a mob, we delivered to production, which blew me away.
Okay, wow.
And it was in a language I've never really worked in before. And I got to navigate that. There were some teams that were having issues with bugs, so it's not always utopia with mobbing, but it was definitely on a much smaller scale. And for this particular team, after a while, they got down to 0 or near 0 again. And then I was on a team that very similar to original mob, went a year and a half, I think with 1 bug caused by something we did. And so you compare those experiences with the 200, 300 bug experiences of my life before mobbing. And so that gives you a feel for the delivery and I guess quality aspects.
Okay, that's great. And is there anything that actually got worse because of mobbing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like any experiment or practice, it accentuates certain things that otherwise can stay hidden. So, for example, if there's interpersonal issues between people on the team, if you're mobbing with them, it forces you to deal with them. You have to work through it to work together. And so I've seen, 99 of 100 times people work through it and it turns out greater. And then 1 out of 100, I think people just like, well, I'm just going to go to another team. And I guess that's the way it can go. We have a mantra: if you're not learning or contributing, you can switch to a different team. And so I've seen that happen before as well. So I think if people don't have the skills to work through interpersonal issues in a really face-to-face sort of way, or there's not someone in the team who can facilitate that, it can lead to issues. And I think it's either, mobbing forces you to deal with it, where if you're code review, it can just kind of stay passive aggressive and distant. Where it's like, you can tell by the tone of the code review that these 2 people aren't quite jiving, but you get to the end of the sprint and it gets approved and you move on anyways, kind of thing. So
It gets swept under the rug, basically. So, okay, and if you've done pair programming before, how do you find mobbing compared to it?
Yeah. I absolutely love pair programming, and I would be happy to do it all day. I think if you look at your system from a lean perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I think what pairing does as far as eliminating waste and turning up flow efficiency, I feel like pairing turns it up to 5. I feel like what mobbing does is it turns it up to 10. It turns it up even more.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a system that requires, 3 different disciplines, 4 different disciplines to be involved, front end, back end, operations, whatever. If you're pairing, you're still going to have waiting and queuing. It might be better, like you have the ops and the data person together, and then the front end and back end together. They work independently, and then they have to resync and code review or what have you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when they're mobbing, they're all there. Everyone's ideas get into the code, and you can go straight to production. You don't have to wait or queue for anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a much simpler system, pairing might be great for you. If all you need is peer review from any other person, it doesn't, no particular skill sets are needed. But I think what I've seen is that the waiting and queuing goes away a lot more with mobbing. And another thing I've noticed with mobbing is, at least for me, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of this is just sharing, it's really
Yeah.
hard to give universal advice to anybody, in one with people and one with software, because they're both very complex systems. But with me, mobbing is more sustainable than pairing, because when the rotation involves more than me and someone else, it gives me a break to reflect on, think about our problem from a different perspective, right? Where if I'm driving and they're navigating what I'm driving, and then I'm navigating, they're taking my ideas, there's no time to, it's harder to think about anything other than the immediate, subset, small micro problem we're working on, right? So when I switch out of driver navigator, I'm in a different role, I can look at what they're doing and be like, oh, okay, I can take on a different role. Like, okay, what they're doing is working, but I'm noticing some code smells.
Mm-hmm.
Or, hey, we've gone like 6 commits and we've implemented 2 features and we haven't gotten feedback on them yet.
Okay.
So after the next break, I'm going to request that we get some feedback on it before we move on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like feedback from someone using the system, or, hey, I think what we're doing is good, but I'm noticing some things that we need to automate
Mm-hmm.
because we're doing a lot of repetitive tasks. Or interpersonally, I'm starting to notice some, too low level navigation. Maybe people, I can sense someone's maybe a little frustrated,
Mm-hmm.
and then it brings an opportunity to notice that and bring it out. And so it lets you reflect on the system a little bit more and add another layer of quality onto something that's harder to do when it's just 2 and you're kind of grinding driver navigator.
Mm-hmm.
And even just that break to not be driving or navigating for a little bit and just hang out and understand what's going on, it something feels refreshing about that.
Mm-hmm.
and less tiring. But yeah, there's some thoughts.
Okay. Okay. That sounds great. And jumping on another question is about doing remote mob programming. Do you have any
Mhm.
particular setup, things you have to consider, and so on?
Yeah. So before COVID, we were doing in-person mob programming. So we had a large room and big screen TVs, and every team had a set of big screen TVs, and they would, mob on those stations. And then if you wanted to go see another person or another mob, you just walk to their part of the building and do it. So when COVID happened, we had to figure out pretty quick how to do it remotely.
Yeah.
And thankfully, many in the industry had already kind of paved the way for it.
Mhm.
So actually, a friend of mine on my team at the time had been pairing or mobbing before he joined our organization.
Mhm.
And what he introduced us was a tool called AnyDesk, which, so there's many ways to remote mob. Here's just one way.
Yeah.
And it's the way we typically do it. And we took those same mob stations that were all, we were done in person. Now they're in a closet somewhere on site at the organization's location. And we all remote into it via the AnyDesk software. And what it
Uh-huh.
allows is for multiple people to see the same computer, and you can turn on and off control. So we all can see. And then when it's my turn to drive, I push a button on the top toolbar on any desk. And now I'm, using the mouse and the keyboard. And we use the same mob timer that we're using before, because before it was a timer that ran on the machine. And so it facilitates the switch of driver and navigator every 5 minutes or so. And so we basically used a lot of the same tools, but now any desk in to share the screen and switch off driver navigator in a pretty seamless fashion. It's just click a button, boom, I'm driving, click a button, now my control is off and I'm not driving. And then with video and audio, anything could work, Zoom or what have you, but we tend to use Teams. And yeah, and that's pretty much what we've been doing largely since COVID. We've also experimented some with it, instead of being a physical machine in a closet somewhere that's hooked up to hardware, for example, for testing. For teams who don't need that and want to be a little more nimble, I suppose, you can go with cloud machines that you can spin up. And either it's just like a saved AMI image of where you last left off, and then you can just pick up where you left off and start it up. And so you're only paying for it as you use it. Or two, I've seen teams who, I can give a link, Jay Bazuzzi and Llewellyn Falco have created a set of scripts to basically from nothing EC2 instance, have it automatically via scripts install all the things to start, a mobbing session. And so you can do the cloud version of that. The other way that I've only tried out a little bit, and I think it's actually more common out there in the community, is a Git handover tool called Mob. And what it does is it facilitates driver navigator handoff, but instead of sharing the same computer, we'll use a distributed timer like Mob Time, for example, is one where we all have access to it. It's a website, but it's a shared timer of switching driver navigator. And when it's time to switch driver navigator, in the command line tool, you type a command and it pushes it up via Git, and then someone else pulls it down, and then they're driving, and then they share their screen. So every driver navigator switch is a mob shell next, and then I stop sharing, someone else shares, and they share their screen. And so there are pros and cons of the different approaches, but that's some of the ones that are out there.
Okay, that's quite informative. You told me about having people with different specialties in the team. And what about experience?
Yeah.
How is that?
Yeah. On every team I've been on, there's usually quite a bit of diversity from experience levels. So people who are fresh out of school versus 5 years experiences versus 30 years experience. And so what's pretty great about that is it just naturally flows with mob programming, because if someone's learning, they're encouraged to ask questions when it's their navigation turn. So if you don't know what's going on, just ask questions. We'll answer them, help bring up to speed. When they're driving as a learner, they'll take in navigation, ask questions, understand, and then if needed, they'll be told exactly what to type. And for the case of me and learning a new language, I was able to pick it up pretty quick just by being a good driver and hearing people navigate this coding language for me. And so, so it tends to work quite well. You have different dynamics. There might be general observations diversity is good, because that usually leads to different skill levels teaching each other. The less experienced asking great questions that probably provoke the more experienced people to think about it differently than they have always thought about it. The more experienced people teaching the inexperienced. A team of all juniors would be interesting. I've seen it work well. And in many ways, it's almost like a team of all seniors, in that when you hit the roof of your knowledge, you go into a different mode of mobbing. So instead of like someone in the mob knows what to do and is teaching, or they may not know exactly what to do, but they have like a general path to figure it out, a path to discovery, right? But when you hit that, when you come to the end of your rope as a mob, no matter what the skill level, I've been in a mob with primarily experienced people, and we still hit the end of our rope pretty often. It turns from seeking guidance from the mob to discover the right path, to we're all trying to figure out and discover the right path. So it might turn into a driver and a navigator running an experiment on the mob station, and then a third person researching documentation or Stack Overflow and what other people have done to solve the problem, right?
Mhm.
And then a fourth person drawing on a whiteboard, trying to think through the problem and look at it from a different angle. And so it kind of turns into this everyone researches or everyone experiments kind of thing to
Okay.
discover the path. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's good. And is there an issue, for example, when a junior tries to navigate a senior, and what happens then? How do you handle that? Because I suppose there's a big discrepancy between experience levels here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So, I mean, I think typically, at least in environment, experienced people go in knowing that they'll be inexperienced people. And so that's part of the expectation. So typically, if you have people who want to mob, whether you hire like we do, or you facilitate the experiment that only the people who are mobbing are people who want to mob, a senior person typically I don't think will be frustrated because they see it as an opportunity for knowledge sharing, right? And so if I'm an experienced person and someone's navigating something that I disagree with, it's typically best to let them run the experiment and see what happens. Depending on how severe it is, sometimes I'll speak up and talk about pros and cons and if they'd like to proceed and that kind of thing. But learning by experimentation is a great way for us all to learn. And there are often times where I disagree with the navigation and it turns out to work just great. And then, okay, I learned something now. And so, yeah. And so I think potentially it could be a problem if, let's say, there's an experienced person who doesn't want to mob and just loves going fast and furious and is forced to mob or pair. They're probably going to be very frustrated at descending scales to help someone else learn or, that kind of thing. So I would typically tailor experiments to be with people who want to do it, right? So who want to teach, who want to learn, who are willing to experiment with ideas that aren't their own, right? And see how they play out. Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, do you think less experienced people make a progress way fast in a mobbing setup than in the other way where they code in silos, receive feedback, and so on?
Yeah, that's generally what I've seen is seeing people grow really, really fast. There are cases where someone grows at maybe an above average rate than they normally would, but I've definitely know several cases where their growth was insane. So new to software development, new to coding, new to all the things. And then a year later, they're leading teams, facilitating discussions, teaching sessions inside the organization, champion. So there are stories like that that are really fun and that some people really thrive. And then I've also seen even experienced people, you come into an organization, you don't know the domain. They may be using a language you're somewhat familiar with, but they're using it with a framework you don't know. And what's quite incredible is that even at places, not my current organization was before, we'd have someone come in and they would join a mob and they would be contributing on day one. They'd be teaching things on day one. They'd be learning things on day one, where you compare that to hey, read these 20 documents and maybe we'll throw you a bug to figure out, And so yeah, I would say in my experience, the growth rate is typically higher than normal. But there are, I think for that to work out with all the different personality types is you got to establish radical candor and psychological safety out front. Basically in the fact that it's okay to not know, to share you don't know, and so I think it's good for seniors to demonstrate that. They're in a group with a bunch of some experienced people, and they're nervous to say that they don't know something. You talk about what you don't know. All right, we're coming up with this problem. I have no idea how to do this, and just you know, and just model those kind of things. And also model, you know, hey, I'm having trouble thinking through this as a group. Take me out of the rotation for a little bit. I'm going to run some experiments on the side. You know, maybe I'm still in the video call, but I'm running some experiments on the side. Or I'll be back in a half an hour. I just want to think through this and I'll come back to y'all. Because some people may be overwhelmed by mobbing, and working through that's great, but it's also okay as well to experiment on the side and come back. And so I think modeling those kind of behaviors so no one feels trapped
Okay.
is very important. Yeah.
Okay. And do you do any mock retrospectives? And if so, what does that look like? So on.
Yeah. So the what I love about mob programming is it enables you to do if in software development large batches is a problem, and large feedback loops is a problem. If you look at it from continuous improvement perspective, you could also argue that large feedback loops and large batches is a problem for continuous improvement. And so what I loved about mobbing is it creates an environment where it's easier to tighten that feedback loop, very much so. And so I'll explain the two ends of the spectrum I've seen with mob programming, and of course there's things in the middle. But on the one end, it's probably more traditional retrospectives. So at the end of the day or at the end of the week, the team gets together, they have a retro format, they throw in stickies, they explain their stickies, they dot vote on them, and you know, the typical retrospective discussion. I think the innovation that's come along with mobbing is kind of on the other end of the micro perspective, which is where, you know, so there's a very loose style of this and there's a very structured style of this. So a very structured style would be a mob timer with a Pomodoro built in, and then a retrospective at the end of every session before or after a break, for example. And what these retrospective conversations is, it's because you don't have a week's worth of data. You just have like the last hour or two, or for example, or maybe only 50 minutes. There's no need for stickies and all that stuff all the time, because basically you can just say like, wow, what didn't go well in the last half an hour? What went well? You know, how can we turn that up? Or what experiment can we run? Okay, after the break, let's run this experiment and see how that goes. I'm going to stop navigating you at a low level, and I'm going to start going high level and allow you to explore what the low level would be, you know, whatever the experiment is. Or let's turn up the mob timer or turn it down. Or, hey, I noticed we're deploying this piece of the software by hand. You know, you all want to run an experiment to automate it after the break. And so basically it takes the context down to a very short amount of time. And that makes it very easy to run little experiments without getting buy-in from a large group of people or having to wait a week to suggest the idea. It can just happen very quickly.
Okay. And you do it in a structured manner with a timer, or whenever the mob session ends, you do a little retrospective.
Yeah, and that's where there's diversity. So some people are very structured with it, and some are more loose with it. So it's basically just like friends having a conversation after work.
Okay.
Yeah, like it may be in the middle of a session. Just be like, whoa, hold on, stop the line. I see a problem. Can we retrospect on this thing for a little bit before we continue to work? Or you know, near the end of before lunch or near the end of a break, someone will just facilitate one informally, right? And so and then on the formal side, you have people that have it built into timers, and there's like prompt cards and all these different like games or structured ways to do it. Yeah.
And it depends on the team in Hunter Industries, or you have a general way to do it, like general preference?
Yeah, every team decides. So every team discovers their own way to do it. And yeah, I think the only thing that tries to get coached in from kind of the system perspective is teams are highly encouraged to do retrospectives. It's not told how, but you're just highly encouraged to do them.
Okay. Good. And what's usually the size of the mob?
Yeah, so it typically A mob working together is 3 to 5 people in most
Mhm.
cases for us. And and then you get into like multi-mobbing and things like that, where you have several mobs working together on one goal or one product,
Mhm.
or one kind of budget area, and then they have to coordinate their efforts. So that's also a thing with some of the teams. So yeah.
Wow. Okay. Multi-mobbing sounds really interesting, but we'll run out of time if we get into it. So I won't delve there. Okay. And how frequently do you mob? How long is a given session?
Yeah, so there's no rules. No one's forced to mob, but generally, since people who work in our organization want to mob in our department, uh, the thing that's kind of come up naturally is you have every day you have an hour of dedicated learning time that you can do solo or
Mhm.
with other people if you like. And
Mhm.
then the rest of the workday, everyone else is available to pair mob. And then
Mhm.
so channels will form where people are mobbing, and then you go join those. And typically it's the rest of the day. And
Okay.
so, and then on Fridays, there's extra dedicated learning time. I think there's 2 hours additional.
Okay.
And, but yeah, but, there's people who've broken away and said, hey, I'm going to go uh, do some experimentation solo and bring it back to the mob. I've seen that happen quite a few times.
Mhm.
And or pairs will form. So we've been in a mob before when we're like, okay, there seems like there's an option A and option B.
Mhm.
And more often than not, we'll do both options together as a mob serially. We'll try A and then we'll try B and then we'll evaluate. We've also
Mhm.
done cases where it's like, all right, let's split into 2 pairs and try A and B in parallel and then come back together and see what we discovered. So, yep.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Good. And my last question is about the roles you have in a given map. You told about
Mhm.
driver and navigator. Do you have
Mhm.
any other roles? Why?
Yeah. And actually, I'll recommend a game, Willem Larson's Mob Programming RPG. It has, it's a game you can play. So if you're like at a meetup or something, you can play the game. Or if a team starting out with mob programming, it could be a fun game to play where you basically progress through the different levels. So you start out with driver, navigator, mobber. I'm pulling up a picture here myself of the different roles, but then after that, you can go on to get experience points for being a researcher or sponsoring someone else's ideas or navigating someone who's navigating, kind of navigate the navigator. Someone who
Mhm.
suggests automation, that's the automationist. Someone who picks out code smells, the nose. There's the archivist, someone who is either drawing or documenting what's going on to help the team understand or help others
Mhm.
understand. And it kind of goes on and on of various roles that people can take on, and it's pretty much potentially infinite, just because any role that helps the mob move forward with flow efficiency
Mhm.
is open game. Yeah, but those are some ones that have been out there and documented, and they're good ones for people to try on, because I think that's a common misconception with mobbing is, well, if I'm not driving or navigating, how am I just sitting there, not being helpful, just staring at them, where
Yeah.
there's all these other things you can do to help move the team forward.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Great. So this was all I had on my list,
Nice.
and probably something else will pop up, but I think this is a lot of really, really useful information. So I'm really grateful that you share this. Uh, and now I'm going to stop the recording. So uh,
Awesome.